The pilot for Hannibal was a hell of an introduction to the show, full of psychology, metaphor, and of course, blood. It was the perfect appetizer of things to come. Also, like with many murder mystery thriller police shows, it followed the usual series of events. Murder happens, detectives investigate, killer is caught. However, with Hannibal, and like with so many other parts of the show, that will get a lot more complicated as we continue. Let's begin, shall we? We begin with Will Graham at the gun range, still very much affected by the shooting of Garrett Jacob Hobbes, as the target becomes his body, floating towards Will from the darkness. He fires wildly, and that's when Crawford wakes him up from his nightmare. This trauma Will displays over the killing of Garrett Jacob Hobbes will continue to be a huge plot point in the show. I like how they took such a small mention in the book and expanded it to arguably one of the biggest plot points of the entire show outside of Hannibal himself, especially because Hobbes' daughter Abigail will become an incredibly important character herself. The FBI have found Garrett Jacob Hobbes' nutty cave, a hunting cabin in the woods, and inside they find the antlers he would hang his victims on. And Crawford postulates an idea that Hobbes wasn't working alone, suspecting Abigail of helping him. Crawford makes a convincing case, saying how she's the perfect bait for Hobbes to use to capture other girls. However, Will dismisses it and asserts Hobbes killed alone. And because the show has displayed Will's magical mind, we, the audience, are far more inclined to believe him over Crawford, despite Crawford being the more experienced investigator. But we, just like Will, may be falling into a trap. Hobbes didn't leave much evidence, but Will did find a single red hair, as we shift to a freshly showered and naked woman who places photos of the cabin into a new article on tattlecrime.com. Yeah, this version of Freddie Lowndes is quite the change to Philip Seymour Hoffman in Red Dragon. And it's quite a shrewd decision as well. It's not just a case of making the character a woman. The point is to move away from that cliched, sleazy tabloid reporter look. And because she doesn't look that way, it fits with one of the biggest themes of the show, which is deception. We then get to see the opening credits for the first time, as the pilot didn't have any. They are deeply unsettling, and appropriately so, as we watch wine form the faces of our characters, wine becoming blood. Which is important because the idea of transubstantiation, the Christian idea of Christ's body and blood becoming bread and wine, will be something that comes up quite a few times in the show, and may be an insight into how Hannibal thinks too. After the credits, Will returns to the classroom, taking a moment to prepare and put on his barrier, receiving a standing ovation from the students. Will seems almost insulted at the gesture, as he tells them to stop, and then outlines how he got lucky. There was no clue, no epiphany, putting it down to bad bookkeeping and dumb luck. Will then focuses on the copycat, because he has become the priority now. After class, Will is visited by Bloom, checking on how he's doing, and to warn him that Crawford is on his way. Crawford tells him that he's been given the go-ahead to get back into the field, which is where Crawford wants him, but Bloom is more concerned for Will's mental health. Crawford is insisting on a psych evaluation, which will be conducted by Hannibal Lecter, so great choice there. Will isn't interested in psychiatry, but Crawford is concerned by all the time Will is spending in Abigail Hobbes' hospital room, so he reluctantly agrees to the conversation with Lecter. And to gain Will's trust, Lecter hands him a clean bill of health, rubber stamping the evaluation, claiming that now they can proceed unobstructed. But also, Lecter may have done that because he knew that Will wouldn't pass it. So again, Lecter's just lighting that fuse and seeing what happens. Lecter wonders if Will feels obligated towards Abigail, considering he both saved her life and orphaned her. In response, Will asks if Lecter feels obligated too, as he did the saving. Of course he says yes, but I do believe that this is all just manipulation to get Will to feel how Lecter wants him to feel. Lecter also says that Crawford's suggestion that Abigail killed with her father is vulgar, but entirely possible. But Will is still in denial. We then move to the Maryland State Forest, where a group of kids stumble across what seems to be people buried in the ground, who have been kept alive to feed the mushrooms growing on them. There must be something weird going on, because so far, every psycho in this show has cannibalistic tendencies. But I do think it's like that for a reason, showing the many different interpretations of the same idea. But of course, the killers will diversify as we go on. Now, it's widely known that Hannibal was cancelled in its 3rd season, much to my chagrin. Hannibal was originally supposed to run for 7 seasons, and because of that, Season 1, and to a lesser extent Season 2, has Killer of the Week episodes. This will be almost completely phased out for Season 3, because Bryan Fuller saw the decline in ratings and decided to speed things up quite dramatically. Before we get to that though, Will is back on the gun range. He wants to make sure next time he'll only need 1 bullet instead of 10. Beverly joins him and gives him a few pointers on his shooting stance, which does indeed seem to help. I do believe that this moment is the first of Will beginning to trust and bond with Katz. She didn't really start things off great last episode, but she and Will become quite close confidants, and this is the start of that. Will is then taken to the site where the recent bodies were found, and yes, they were indeed buried alive to feed the mushrooms. While Will does his pendulum thing, in the crowd that's gathered, Freddie Lowndes is surreptitiously taking photographs and claiming to be a parent of one of the boys who found the bodies. It's honestly quite clever and sneaky how she's able to get answers from the cop. And in Will's mind, the pendulum swings and he sees the graves being filled and the mushrooms growing. His mind begins to recreate the burying, however, a vision of Garrett Jacob Hobbes pulls him out of it, stopping mid-thought. And then in a rather horrific moment, Will is grabbed by the still-alive body in the grave. I can't tell if it's intentional, but that moment always reminded me of a similar moment in the movie Seven. It's probably a coincidence, but I can't help making the connection. After the incident with seeing Hobbes in the grave, Will gives Lecter the evaluation back, thinking it was premature. Of course, not realising that doesn't really matter to Lecter. What's interesting though is that vision of Hobbes wasn't metaphorical, it was a genuine hallucination. Lecter makes sure Will hasn't told Crawford before declaring it's just stress and not worth reporting, so nothing suspicious about that. And Will rather meekly admits that it's difficult for him to see a killer's mind now that he has killed. So instead of psychiatry, Hannibal decides to once again help with the case, going through the killer's methods. In Red Dragon, before Hannibal was caught, we saw a brief glimpse of these 2 men working together to solve murders. So for the show, we are seeing how that relationship developed over time. And it's important to see it too, because although Hannibal may have ulterior motives with Will, I do genuinely believe he wants to help Will to understand and empathise with killers, because maybe that's what Hannibal needs too. At the same time in the waiting room, Freddie Lowndes is recording the conversation and pretends to be one of Lecter's new patients named Kimball when he greets her. Freddie gives her best doe-eyed innocent patient routine, and Lecter seems convinced by it.
Since that's why I'm here, I was wondering...
Are you Freddie Lowndes?
For about half a second. Yeah, Lecter's no fool, and he can tell when he's being played. Lecter makes her delete the conversation she recorded, and then gives her a thorough chastising. And a quick cut to Hannibal and Crawford enjoying a meal of pork loin together is meant to imply they're eating some of Freddie Lowndes, but it's just a red herring. That's a bit premature. That's not to say what they're eating is innocent, of course, and Hannibal can't help getting his smug little quips in that only he will find funny.
Well, next time bring your wife. I'd love to have you both for dinner.
Lecter thinks Crawford is worried Will is broken, and he then casually asks if Crawford has lost anyone in the field, which of course Crawford and Lecter both know he has, which is nicely laying the groundwork for a much later plot. Back to the mushroom bodies, all are subject to autopsies, even the alive one who died on the way to the hospital, and they discover the killer is targeting diabetics, inducing comas and then burying them. How is he inducing comas, you ask? By changing their medication, as we cut to a pharmacy and to one of the strangest moments in the entire series.
Picking up a prescription for Gretchen Speck.
Yes, Gretchen Speck. Why is she so strange? Well, because she's a character from Bryan Fuller's Wonder Falls. A show starring Caroline Davanas as a souvenir shop worker who one day starts hearing inanimate objects talking to her and getting her to do good deeds. But it gets weirder, because a character called Marianne Marie Beetle shows up in Wonder Falls, and she also makes appearances in both Pushing Daisies and the failed pilot for a Monsters reboot that Bryan Fuller did called Mockingbird Lane. So yeah, Hannibal Lecter exists in the same universe where inanimate objects talk to people, a pie maker can resurrect the dead, and the monsters exist. So I think you can agree that's pretty goddamn weird. Oh, and in case you're thinking it's just a reused name and actor and there is no connection, Gretchen mentions that she's divorced, and that wedding we see happen in Wonder Falls. Anyway, back to the murder cavalcade. Gretchen needs her insulin, but the pharmacist, who is our killer, gives her the wrong dosage, even managing to get her address for a later abduction. Fortunately, the team have already figured everything out as SWAT mobilizes outside the building. Crawford and Will get to the pharmacy, but the guy they're looking for isn't there. But they do manage to rescue Gretchen from the boot of his car. And back at the pharmacy, it turns out Freddie Lowndes is not just rude and a nuisance. She inadvertently tipped the killer off. And of course, Lecter isn't pleased with her actions either.
You are naughty, Miss Lowndes.
And in a motel room, Freddie Lowndes gets an unexpected knock at the door. Because we know that her character is very much on borrowed time, or at least we think we know, the show's going to keep throwing these red herrings at us because we're supposed to think that Lecter's on the other side of that door. But turns out it's just a police raid. Freddie is adamant that she can't be arrested, but Crawford is thinking otherwise. She claims to have gotten all her info from the detective she saw at the scene, but the camera tells a different story, with Zeller looking pretty nervous. Crawford can indict her for obstructing justice because she tipped off the murderer, but also contaminated the Hobbes cabin crime scene. But he makes a deal with her that she stops writing about Will and no further action will be taken, and chances are she's lost her secret informant too.
You used me.
With Will, he's back in Abigail Hobbes' hospital room, and the feathered stag appears again. This is all a dream though, obviously, as Bloom makes him more comfortable, with Will soon woken up by Bloom reading to Abigail. Bloom thinks Will is so dedicated to Abigail because this is a win for him, but of course it's more than that. Also, this scene would be the first to set up a potential love interest between Will and Bloom, and although something like that will show up every now and then, relationships are rarely that simple in this show. Outside her motel, Freddie is approached by the cop she spoke to at the scene. He was suspended, potentially fired for helping her, and she's her very smug self, because this isn't the first cop she's gotten fired. However, things get worse when the mushroom killer shoots the cop and demands to know everything about Will. In Red Dragon, Freddie Lowndes experiences the consequences of his shoddy reporting. However, there, it wasn't all his fault. He was set up by Will and Crawford and their plan to catch the Tooth Fairy, which subsequently backfired. So I think it's important to note that the consequences this version of Freddie experiences are entirely of her own making. In an ambulance, Freddie is unharmed, but she did tell the killer everything about Will, specifically Abigail, and that is where the killer is going, to bury Abigail so Will can connect with her better. At least that's what he believes. The killer is able to disguise himself, and Will is returning when he's told by Crawford what's going on, finding Abigail is now missing. And in the basement of the hospital, it seems like Will's shooting training pays off, as he's able to stop this killer with a single bullet. He tries to tell Will that people are better and more connected as fungus, and he just wants Will to understand him better. Will says he doesn't, but this does mirror perhaps what Lecter is after as well. And in Lecter's office, Will goes through the incident, and because Will didn't see Hobbes when he shot the mushroom killer, Lecter posits it's not the killing he's wrestling with, but that Will liked doing it. And with Lecter out of focus for this conversation, you could almost argue he's like the devil on Will's shoulder, gently nudging him to his way of thinking, with Lecter all but telling Will how powerful killing makes him feel.
Killing must feel good to God, too. He does it all the time.
Lecter mentions a church collapsing on worshippers, one of his favourite subjects. Will asks how God felt about that, ending the episode with the perfect line.
You felt powerful.
If episode 1 is about the characters and how they will be portrayed, episode 2 is about the story and how that will play out. And also introducing the killer of the week, because we'll be seeing a hell of a lot more of those, and they are all just as bizarre. But perhaps the idea of adding more killers than just Buffalo Bill and the Tooth Fairy is to imply that Hannibal isn't just a killer, he's an apex predator among predators. Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to give a massive thank you to all my Patreon donators. Their support really does help a lot. And if you would like to contribute to the channel and gain access to the Deusdaecon Reviews Discord server, the link is in the description below. And if you would like to get more content aside from the reviews, please consider checking out the Twitch channel where I stream live 5 days a week, 9 PM GMT, with subjects ranging from Let's Plays, discussions, and movie watch-along nights. So join me live if you wish to see stunning moments of strategy just like this one. You, trade with me. Oh! That was a mistake! That was a mistake! Holy shit! What? Fuck! The link is in the description, so I'll hopefully see you there. And on YouTube, I'll see you next time.